I'm disgusted by you, you plague. The widow's voice cut through the icy forest air like a blade. With a brutal shove, she dropped her small daughter onto the damp earth, the child's eyes wide with terror, but unable to form a scream. The girl's choked sob echoed as her mother's shadowy figure walked away, disappearing among the trees. In seconds, a deep growl tore through the silence, and the shadow of a gigantic panther emerged, its eyes gleaming in the twilight. The girl trembled, her heart pounding like a runaway drum, when an even larger shape leaped from the shadows, and what it did next defied all logic of nature. A spectacle of fury and grace that the little girl would never forget. The shape, an imposing leopard with golden fur and dark spots, leapt with surprising agility, landing between the child and the hungry panther. There was no savage attack, but a silent and overwhelming display of power. The growl that escaped the leopard's throat was not a hunting sound, but a thunderous warning. An ancestral caution that made the leaves tremble on the trees and the panther itself recoil a step, its red eyes now divided between the easy prey and the new, formidable obstacle. The girl, huddled on the cold ground, watched the scene with a pounding heart. Her wide eyes captured every movement, every tension in the big cat's muscles. The panther, sleek and black as night itself, hissed, its hunger evident, but the leopard's presence was undeniably superior. The spotted guardian, head held high and body tense, radiated unquestionable authority. Its golden eyes fixed on the panthers, a duel of wills that needed no claws or teeth to be understood. It was a protective fury, an insurmountable barrier raised in defense of innocence. The panther, sensing the leopard's unwavering determination and dominant strength, let out a final, frustrated growl. Its tail lashed the air in discontent, but the instinct for survival spoke louder than hunger. With a swift, stealthy movement, it turned and vanished into the forest's darkness, as if it had never existed, leaving behind only the echo of its disappointment. The silence that followed was almost as frightening as the growl. The girl remained motionless, her body trembling, unable to process what had just happened. Her savior, the leopard, slowly turned its head, its deep, intelligent eyes meeting hers. There was no threat in its gaze, only a calm curiosity and perhaps a spark of compassion. It lowered its head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost like a greeting, a silent promise of protection. With a delicacy that contradicted its size and wild nature, the leopard approached, its large, soft muzzle lightly touching the girl's cheek. She felt the warmth of its fur, its gentle breath, and a shiver ran through her body, not of fear, but of a new and unknown emotion: relief. It was an unexpected touch, a gesture of affection coming from where it was least expected. Her tears, previously held back by terror, began to roll silently down her face, no longer from despair, but from mute gratitude. The leopard then moved back a little, turned, and took a few slow steps, looking back as if inviting her to follow. The girl, still dazed but driven by an instinctive trust, stood up. Her small feet, previously paralyzed by terror, began to move. She followed the imposing animal, which walked with majestic grace, guiding her through the trees. The forest, once a labyrinth of shadows and dangers, now seemed less threatening under the protection of her silent guardian. Each step was an act of faith, a journey to a safe refuge, away from the cruelty that had abandoned her and towards an uncertain but hopeful destiny. The little girl, whose name had not yet been revealed, but whose heart already carried the weight of immense pain, followed the leopard with a mixture of awe and a childlike faith that bloomed from the purest necessity. Her eyes, once brimming with tears of terror, now reflected the faint moonlight filtering through the leaves, catching the golden sheen of her guardian's fur. Every dry leaf that crunched under her feet seemed a reminder of the fragility of her existence, but the silent and imposing presence of the feline before her was an invisible shield against the fear that still tried to cling to her tightly. The leopard, with its smooth and determined gait, seemed to know every shortcut, every exposed route, every hidden corner of that deep forest. It neither ran nor hurried her. Its steps were measured, as if it were attentive to the small, stumbling figure behind it. From time to time, it would turn its head, its golden eyes meeting hers in a brief but comforting visual contact. It was a silent invitation to continue, a promise that she would not be left behind again. The girl, exhausted but driven by a force that came from somewhere deep within her being, dragged her feet, feeling weariness settle into her small, already aching muscles. The night air was imbued with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, an aroma that would have frightened her before, but which now, under the leopard's protection, seemed merely part of a vast and mysterious world. She watched the animal's tail sway rhythmically, a mesmerizing pendulum guiding her through the dancing shadows. With each step, the image of her mother, her face distorted by rage and cruel words, seemed to diminish slightly, replaced by the majestic silhouette of the leopard. It was as if the forest, which once represented the end, now opened up to a new beginning, an unexpected path to salvation. The sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, when the leopard finally slowed its pace. They emerged from a denser area, and the girl saw a clearing ahead, bathed in the first light of morning. In the center of the clearing, there was a large moss-covered rock, and beside it, a small stream murmured softly. The leopard stopped, turned to her, and with a slow, careful movement, lay down beside the rock, observing her with its piercing eyes. The girl, whose legs could no longer support her, collapsed onto the soft ground of the clearing. The relief was so great that her tears returned. But this time they were tears of exhaustion and a silent gratitude that words could not contain. She looked at the leopard, at that wild creature that had saved and guided her, and a faint smile, the first in many hours, appeared on her lips. It was a smile of pure innocence, a recognition of unexpected kindness in the heart of a world that seemed to have turned against her. The leopard, sensing the girl's exhaustion, closed its eyes for an instant as if inviting her to rest. The clearing with the stream and the rock seemed like a sanctuary, a refuge of peace after the storm of terror. The girl, feeling safe for the first time since she had been abandoned, rested her head against the cool rock, the sound of the stream lulling her thoughts. There, under the watchful eye of her spotted guardian, she found a moment of respite, a glimpse of hope beginning to blossom in her small heart. The journey was far from over, but for now she was safe, and that was all that mattered. The journey was far from over, but for now she was safe, and that was all that mattered. The cool rock against her face was an unexpected comfort, an anchor in the vastness of her helplessness. The gentle murmur of the stream, once just a distant sound, now transformed into a lullaby, a soft melody that cradled her exhausted body into a deep and truly restorative sleep. For the first time in many hours, perhaps days, the little girl did not dream of her mother's angry face, nor of the menacing shadows of the forest that had swallowed her. Instead, her childlike mind, resilient and pure, wandered through flowery fields, where a great guardian with golden spots watched her with kind eyes and unwavering calm. Upon waking, the sun was already higher in the sky, filtering through the dense tree canopies and painting the clearing with patches of warm, dancing light. She blinked slowly, her eyes still heavy with sleep and a little swollen from the previous night's tears. The first thing she saw, as she focused, was the imposing leopard, still lying beside the rock, but with its head raised, observing her with calm, protective vigilance. There was no haste in its movements, just a constant presence that brought an indescribable comfort. The girl felt her throat dry and rough, and her stomach rumbled in a soft protest. With an effort she sat up, her small hands rubbing her eyes, trying to shake off the last trace of sleep. The leopard, as if understanding her most basic need, rose with silent grace and walked a few steps towards the crystal-clear stream. It lowered its head and drank the fresh water, looking back at the girl in a gesture that seemed like an invitation. The girl, without hesitation, crawled to the bank and, cupping her hands, drank the pure cold water. It was the taste of life, a balm for her frightened soul and tired body. The leopard watched, its golden eyes fixed on her, a constant and protective presence that defied all logic. Hunger still gnawed at her, but her thirst had been quenched, and the mere presence of her guardian was sustenance for her spirit, a promise that she was not alone. She felt a strange peace, a deep connection with that wild creature that by some miracle had chosen to be her guardian angel. Meanwhile, far away, within the cold, opulent walls of the mansion that now seemed too empty, the widow returned. Her footsteps echoed in the silent corridors, each sound amplified by the solitude she had so craved, but which now somehow seemed to weigh upon her like a heavy cloak. At first, there was a chilling relief, a sense of duty fulfilled in her twisted mind. The freedom she so coveted was there, palpable, within her grasp. There would be no more childish crying, no incessant demands, no shadow of the small figure she saw only as an impediment to her new life of luxury and detachment. She sat in the velvet armchair, a glass of wine in hand, and tried to savor the bitter victory. But with each sip, a strange and uncomfortable sensation began to settle in her chest. It wasn't guilt, not yet, but a subtle unease, like a distant whisper she tried at all costs to ignore. The image of the girl's wide eyes, of the choked sob she had forced herself to forget, returned in disturbing flashes, haunting her forced peace. She was a burden, she murmured to herself, trying to reaffirm her cruel decision. I deserve to live my life, free from ties. But the voice sounded hollow, empty, devoid of any real conviction. The silence of the house, once an invitation to tranquility and peace, now seemed to scream the absence, the void left by the small being she had discarded so coldly. A pang of fear, cold and unexpected, struck her deep in her soul. What if someone discovered what she had done? What if the forest wasn't as merciless as she had hoped? The bitterness that consumed her was a thick veil, but through it, the light of doubt began to penetrate, faint but persistent, like a ray of sunshine on a cloudy day. She squeezed the glass, the goblet almost crushed in her hand, feeling the fragility of her own conviction. Fortune, freedom, everything seemed less bright, less satisfying than she had imagined. The taste of the wine, once so appreciated, now had a bitter and metallic taste, a reflection of the emptiness that was beginning to corrode her heart. The taste of the wine, once so appreciated, now had a bitter and metallic taste, a reflection of the emptiness that was beginning to corrode her heart. The widow rose from the velvet armchair, the crystal glass in her hand, and walked to the imposing window, observing the garden bathed in the cold moonlight. The rose bushes, which once brought her pleasure, now seemed like mere dark shadows. She tried to push away the image of the girl, but the child's wide eyes persisted in her mind, like incandescent embers burning through her indifference. A chilling shiver ran down her spine, and she hugged herself, not from cold, but from a desolation she couldn't name. The imagined freedom revealed itself to be a cruel mirage, and the fortune, an unbearable weight. The next day, the widow tried to resume her routine, but every task seemed devoid of meaning. Breakfast, served on fine china, had no taste. Reading her favorite books couldn't hold her attention. Her fingers, once agile at the piano, now hesitated over the keys, unable to produce a harmonious melody, only dissonant notes echoing her internal torment. She found herself looking at the clock every few minutes, a growing anxiety tightening her chest. The absence of the girl which she had so desired was now a deafening silence, a vacuum that not even ostentatious luxury could fill. Her lips tightened into a tense line, and her eyes, once full of cruel determination, now revealed a shadow of uncertainty and an insidious fear. The bitterness was still there, but it was corroded by a subtle dread. The fear that her actions would have consequences she couldn't control, that justice, somehow, would reach her. Meanwhile, in the sun-drenched clearing, the little girl felt hunger gnawing intensely at her stomach. The leopard, her guardian, seemed to sense her discomfort. It rose gracefully, stretched, and looked at her, its golden eyes communicating encouragement. With a nod of its head, it began to move again, not deeper into the dense forest, but in a direction the girl instinctively felt was more promising. Her small feet, sore and exhausted, followed the animal's calm pace, driven by an unwavering faith. With each step, the forest seemed to open up, revealing a clearer path, as if nature itself were collaborating. They walked for a long time, the sun climbing in the blue sky and warming the girl's skin. The leopard, always ahead, occasionally stopped to sniff the air or to ensure she was following, casting her a reassuring glance. At one point, it guided her to a thicket of wild berries, and the hungry girl ate eagerly, feeling the sweet taste explode in her mouth, a relief for the dryness and emptiness. It was a gesture of care, proof that even in the wild, kindness could flourish. The connection between them deepened with each moment, an invisible bond woven by necessity, protection, and mutual trust that transcended the barriers of species. Finally, as the sun began to dip westward, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, they emerged from the forest into a less dense area. The girl blinked, her eyes adjusting to the more open light. In the distance, across an open field, she saw something that made her heart race, a small plume of smoke lazily rising into the sky, and soon after, the unmistakable silhouette of rooftops. It was a village, a sign of human life, a refuge. The leopard stopped abruptly, turned to her, and its eyes seemed to say with an unspeakable depth, "You are safe now. My work here is done." It did not advance further, as if it knew its role as guardian had come to an end. The girl looked at it, an overwhelming wave of emotion washing over her, a mixture of gratitude, sadness, and pure love. She knew she would never forget it, her angel of golden spots, the being that had rescued her from the abyss of cruelty and guided her back to hope. The girl looked at the majestic animal, her heart tight with a bittersweet mixture. Her eyes, once filled with gratitude, now filled with deep sadness. It was a silent farewell, an acknowledgement that this extraordinary bond forged in darkness and danger was about to break. The leopard, as if reading her soul, gave one last gentle look, an almost imperceptible nod of its head, and then, with the same silent grace with which it had appeared, turned and vanished among the trees, leaving behind only the echo of its presence. The girl stood there, still, watching the spot where it had disappeared, a solitary tear tracing a path down her face. She knew she would never see it again, but the image of its golden eyes and the feel of its soft fur would be etched forever in her memory. With a trembling sigh, the girl turned towards the village. The smoke, once a distant point, now seemed closer, and the sound of voices and children's laughter floated on the air. Hope mingled with fear. What if the villagers weren't kind? What if they sent her back? But hunger and exhaustion were stronger than apprehension. She began to walk, her small feet dragging across the open field, each step a silent prayer for acceptance. It wasn't long before she was spotted. A group of children playing near the forest's edge stopped, their games interrupted by the sight of the small, dirty and disheveled figure emerging from the woods. Their eyes, wide with curiosity and concern, fixed on her. One of the older children, a girl with dark braids and a kind gaze, ran to the village, shouting for help. In a few minutes, adults appeared, their faces worried and curious, watching the girl who approached slowly, her eyes downcast, her hands clasped tightly. A woman with grey hair and a linen apron, with wrinkles of kindness around her eyes, was the first to approach. She knelt, extending a gentle hand. "Poor little one," she murmured, her voice full of compassion. "What happened to you, dear?" The girl looked up, and the woman saw the terror still present in her gaze, the dirt and scratches on her skin, but also a silent and moving strength. Without a word, the girl collapsed into the stranger's arms, tears finally gushing forth, not from fear, but from overwhelming relief. The woman hugged her tightly, feeling the small body tremble, and led her into the village, where a bowl of warm soup and a soft blanket awaited. The community united in a gesture of pure altruism, each face reflecting concern and the desire to help that lost soul. In the cold, silent mansion, the widow found no peace. The unease of the previous night had transformed into corrosive anguish. Every dancing shadow on the wall seemed like a ghost, every creak of the wood an accusing whisper. She tried to distract herself with the accounting of her husband's vast fortune, but the numbers blurred before her eyes, meaningless. The freedom she had planned was a prison of her own making, and the silence of the house, a constant reminder of her heinous act. Her reflection in the mirror startled her. Her eyes were sunken, with dark circles, and an expression of dread began to form on her previously controlled features. The bitterness that had fueled her now seemed to turn against her, consuming her from within. She found herself imagining terrible scenarios, the girl being found, the story spreading, the justice of men knocking at her door. Cold sweat trickled down her forehead, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. The conviction that she had done the right thing, that the girl was merely an obstacle, crumbled under the weight of overwhelming fear. She tried to drink more wine, but the liquid seemed to burn her throat, offering no solace. The image of the forest, dark and merciless, which she had left behind, now seemed like a monster pursuing her, ready to reveal her secret. With each passing hour, the certainty that the girl was lost forever diminished, replaced by a cruel and terrifying doubt. What if she had survived? What if, by some miracle, the child was alive, ready to testify against her? The widow clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palm. The heinous plan, which had seemed so perfect in her twisted mind, now transformed into a nightmare that gave her no peace. Fortune and freedom, once so desired, were now merely the shackles of her own conscience. The grey-haired woman, Ilara, held the girl with a tenderness the child had never known. The warmth of the soup, simple and nourishing, spread through her body, warding off the cold and emptiness. Wrapped in a soft blanket, the girl felt safe, nestled in Ilara's lap, while the gentle voices of the villagers filled the small cottage with a melody of welcome. She didn't speak, words caught in her throat, but her eyes, once full of terror, now reflected silent gratitude and deep exhaustion. Ilara, with slow gestures, combed her tangled hair, murmuring words of affection. The community, moved by compassion, offered the little they had: bread, a rustic toy, a gentle smile. The small soul, so wounded by cruelty, began to find balm in human kindness, a refuge of peace that the forest, in its wisdom, had revealed. Every touch, every glance wove a new web of trust in her small heart. Meanwhile, in the mansion, the widow's torment reached a new level. Insomnia consumed her, and her nights were populated by vivid nightmares, where the image of the abandoned crying girl mingled with the golden eyes of a hungry panther. She awoke with a start, her heart pounding erratically, cold sweat trickling down her forehead. Her husband's vast fortune, once a promise of freedom and pleasure, now seemed a heavy burden, a constant reminder of her heinous act. She walked through the empty corridors, her footsteps echoing in the solitude, and every shadow seemed to hide a silent observer, an invisible judge. The bitterness that had driven her now transformed into a poison that corroded her from within, and the fear of being discovered was an open wound in her soul. She needed confirmation, a certainty to calm the storm in her mind. The next morning, with a pale face and bloodshot eyes, the widow called her foreman, Samuel. "Samuel," she began, her voice slightly trembling but trying to maintain composure. "I need you to go to the edge of the forest, near Pebble Creek. I believe I lost a family brooch there, a gift from my late husband. It holds great sentimental value. Please search carefully." Samuel, a man of few words, nodded, not questioning the strange task. He took his hat and left, focused on the search for the imaginary brooch. The widow watched him leave from the window, her hands clasped tightly, a mixture of hope and dread. She hoped Samuel would return with news that he had found nothing, a sign, in her twisted mind, that the forest had fulfilled its cruel purpose. Samuel walked along the familiar trail. As he approached the forest's edge, near the creek, he heard voices, children and a woman. Curious, he drew closer, hiding among the trees, and saw the small village. And then he saw her, a small girl with dark hair and large eyes, sitting on Ilara's lap, eating a fruit. His heart froze. The villager's description of a child found in the forest, alone and frightened, echoed in his mind. He recognized her. It was the widow's small daughter, the girl he thought was lost forever. The brooch was forgotten. Samuel felt a chill, a mixture of relief and terrible fear. He knew what this meant. The widow, his mistress, had lied. The girl was alive. With his heart pounding, Samuel turned and ran back to the mansion, the news weighing on him like a stone, the turning point that would change everyone's destiny. Samuel ran as never before, the air cutting his lungs, but the urgency in his heart was greater than any physical exhaustion. The image of the girl, alive and safe in Ilara's arms, contrasted violently with the coldness of the widow's request. He knew he was about to unleash a storm. As he approached the mansion, the imposing structure seemed darker, a castle of secrets and lies. He slowed his pace, trying to control his breathing and the torrent of thoughts that flooded him. How would he tell his mistress? How would he reveal that her heinous plan had failed and that justice somehow was already in motion? In the mansion, the widow sat in her study, the untouched wineglass on the mahogany table. Her eyes were fixed on the door, each minute an eternity. Anxiety gnawed at her from within, a silent plague consuming her false peace. She expected to hear that Samuel had found nothing, that the forest had done its work, but deep in her soul, a voice whispered the opposite, a dark premonition. When she heard Samuel's hurried footsteps in the corridor, her heart leaped. She rose abruptly, the chair scraping the floor, and turned to the door. Samuel entered, his face pale and sweaty, his eyes wide with shock and dread. He didn't need to say a word. The widow saw the truth in his gaze, a truth that struck her like lightning. Her lips trembled. "The brooch, Samuel? Did you find it?" she asked, her voice a mere thread, desperately trying to maintain the facade. Samuel shook his head slowly, his eyes fixed on hers. "No, madam. I found no brooch." He paused, swallowing hard. "But I found her." The blood seemed to freeze in the widow's veins. "Who?" she whispered, though she knew the answer. "The girl, madam, the little one. She's alive. She's in the village, with the villagers." Samuel's words echoed in the study, breaking the oppressive silence. The widow staggered, her hands reaching for support on the table. Her face, previously pale, turned livid. The fear, once a whisper, now screamed in her mind. She had failed. Her plan, so meticulously orchestrated in its cruelty, had fallen apart. The image of the girl, which she had tried to erase, now materialized, a ghost of her own conscience. That's impossible, she exclaimed, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. The forest, the beasts, she couldn't have survived. Samuel merely watched her, sadness and disappointment evident on his face. He had always been loyal, but that loyalty had its limits in the face of such depravity. "She is alive, madam, and she is well. The villagers have taken her in." The widow closed her eyes, an overwhelming dizziness washing over her. The freedom she so coveted transformed into a condemnation, the fortune into a burden. Justice, which she thought she had avoided, now stood at her door, not with a panther, but with the resilience of a child and the kindness of strangers. Meanwhile, in the small village, the girl slept soundly, nestled in an improvised bed of soft furs. Ilara's cottage was a sanctuary of warmth and affection. The other village children, curious and kind, had brought small gifts: a rag doll, a wildflower, a piece of sweet bread. Ilara watched her, her heart full of tenderness. The girl who had arrived as a spectre of suffering now radiated a fragile but real peace. The community had united, offering not only shelter but hope. The seed of overcoming, planted in the darkness of the forest, began to sprout in a soil of love and compassion. Human connection, so absent in her previous life, enveloped her like a warm embrace, promising a future where kindness would prevail over cruelty. The girl, upon waking the next morning, felt a different warmth. Not the harsh sun of the forest, but the coziness of a home. Ilara's eyes, soft and maternal, were the first to meet hers. A gentle smile lit up the woman's wrinkled face, and the girl, for the first time in a long while, felt completely safe. Small gestures of affection filled the day. Ilara offered her sweet porridge, and the girl ate every spoonful with an appetite the forest had awakened. The other village children, previously shy, now invited her to play, showing her corn-husk dolls and teaching her simple songs. The girl's voice, once silenced by trauma, began to emerge in whispers, in suppressed laughter. She still didn't speak about the forest, about the panther or the leopard, but her eyes, once haunted, now shone with renewed hope. The community, in its simplicity, offered what the mansion's wealth could never give: unconditional love and a sense of belonging. Ilara, observing the girl's gradual improvement, felt her heart ache. Who was this child? Where had she come from? The villagers' innate kindness compelled her to seek answers, not out of curiosity, but from a deep desire to ensure the girl had a safe and just future. With each passing day, the girl grew stronger, and with that came the need to understand her own journey. In the mansion, the widow was in a state of denial and fury, but above all, panic. Samuel's words, "She's alive," echoed in her mind like a curse, a death knell for her illusory freedom. She had dismissed him abruptly, her voice a hiss of rage and fear, ordering him never to mention the matter again. But Samuel's gaze, a mixture of dread and disapproval she had never seen before, haunted her. He, who had always been so submissive and loyal, now seemed like a silent judge. The widow tried to regain control, but her mind was in a chaotic whirlwind. The vastness of the house, once a symbol of her power, now seemed like a labyrinth where she was irremediably trapped. She felt watched, judged by every luxury object, every dancing shadow. The idea that the girl was alive and so close was unbearable, an indelible stain on her heinous plan. What if she told? What if the truth came out, exposing her depravity? Panic set in, transforming her usual bitterness into a paralyzing fear, a coldness that consumed her from within. She knew Samuel was a man of principles, with an unwavering moral compass, and this terrified her. He was not a man who would remain silent in the face of such injustice. The widow began to devise new plans, desperate and confused, to contain the truth, to silence the foreman, to make the girl disappear again. But every thought led her to a dead end, and with each attempt at control, the more she felt control slip from her hands. The image of the leopard, which she had dismissed as fantasy, now appeared in her nightmares, its golden eyes watching her, a silent guardian of impending justice. She felt cornered, her mind spiraling into despair. Samuel, for his part, couldn't shake the image of the girl. The joy and relief of seeing her alive were overshadowed by the gravity of the situation. The widow, his mistress, had committed an unthinkable act. The loyalty he had felt for years crumbled to ashes, replaced by a sense of duty and justice. He knew he couldn't remain silent. That child's life and the truth were more important than his job or his own safety. With a heavy heart but a clear mind, he decided that the law of men needed to be informed. He prepared for the difficult task of revealing the mansion's secret, knowing that his words would unleash a storm, but that it was the only way to ensure the innocent little soul received the justice she deserved. Samuel, with a heavy heart but a clear mind, decided that the law of men needed to be informed. He prepared for the difficult task of revealing the mansion's secret, knowing that his words would unleash a storm, but that it was the only way to ensure the innocent little soul received the justice she deserved. That same night, under the cloak of a thin moon that barely penetrated the clouds, Samuel put on his sturdiest boots and a worn coat. His movements were deliberate, each gesture laden with the weight of his decision. He was not a man of grand speeches, but of actions and principles. His loyalty to the widow had turned to ashes the moment he saw the spark of life in the girl's eyes. Now his moral compass pointed towards an arduous but undeniable path. He knew that the journey to the nearest town, where the guard post was located, would be long and dangerous, but the image of the child, so fragile and yet so strong, propelled him forward. As Samuel walked away from the mansion, leaving behind the oppressive silence and the shadows that seemed to writhe with secrets, in the small village, the girl enjoyed a deep and restorative sleep. Ilara, sitting beside her improvised bed, watched her with an affection that transcended kinship. The flickering lamplight illuminated the child's serene face, and Ilara noticed the small changes each day, the tension easing in her shoulders, the faint smile that sometimes blossomed on her lips during sleep. The other women of the village, their hearts full of compassion, had brought herbs for a calming tea and a small embroidered blanket, a gesture of welcome that spoke louder than any words. The girl, still nameless to them, was now the little forest flower, a miracle the community had embraced with unconditional love. In the mansion, the widow found no such refuge. Samuel's absence, whom she had dismissed with a furious shout, was a new torment. Every creak of the house, every shadow on the wall, seemed to mock her attempt at control. She walked through the empty halls, the wine glass in her trembling hands, her eyes bloodshot from insomnia and fear. The image of Samuel, with that look of disapproval, haunted her. He was not a man to break promises, and the widow knew his loyalty had run out. Panic, once a whisper, was now a strident chorus in her mind. What if he spoke? What if he revealed her secret? The fortune once so desired was now a heavy burden, a golden prison that suffocated her. She felt cornered, the web of her own lies closing around her. Samuel, for his part, continued his journey. The sun was already beginning to tint the horizon with rosy hues when he finally spotted the first lights of the town. His feet ached, his body was exhausted, but his determination was unwavering. He knew that what he was about to do would change his life forever. But justice for that child was a value he could not betray. Upon reaching the guard post, he took a deep breath, the fresh morning air filling his lungs. With a firm voice, despite his weariness, he introduced himself and asked to speak with the chief of the guard. His eyes, tired but full of undeniable truth, met the officer's. "I have a story to tell," Samuel began. "A story about a girl, a forest, and a cruelty that cannot go unpunished." The words, spoken with solemn gravity, filled the small office, initiating a new phase in the pursuit of justice. The chief of the guard, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and keen eyes, leaned forward, his expression serious. He listened to Samuel with an attention that brooked no interruptions, observing every tremor in his calloused hands, every inflection in his choked voice. Samuel narrated the facts with brutal honesty, starting with the widow's strange request to search for a non-existent brooch, moving through his discovery of the girl in the village, alive and welcomed, and culminating in the terrible realization of his mistress's cruelty. He described the terror in the child's eyes, the kindness of Ilara and the community, and the widow's contained fury upon learning that her plan had failed. The chief of the guard, whose name was Arthur, took a deep breath when Samuel finished, silence filling the small office. He ran a hand over his face, thoughtful. "So, you're telling me," Arthur began, his voice low and measured, "that the lady of the mansion, the widow, abandoned her own daughter in the forest to die, and that this child was saved and is now under the care of the villagers?" Samuel nodded, his eyes fixed on Arthur's. "It's the pure truth, Chief. I saw her with my own eyes. The girl is there, and the widow. She is consumed by fear and rage." Arthur stood up, walking to the window and looking out at the town square that was beginning to awaken. The gravity of the situation weighed on him. It was a story of unimaginable depravity, but also of a miracle and a heart-warming human kindness. "We cannot ignore this, Samuel," he said, turning to the foreman. "Justice must be done, not only for the child, but for the soul of our community. We need to act cautiously, but firmly." He began to outline a plan, his gestures firm and decisive. It would be necessary to go to the village, speak with Ilara and the girl, and then confront the widow. Meanwhile, in the village, the girl sat at Ilara's table, drawing with a piece of charcoal on a piece of wood. Her drawings were simple but full of life, flowers, birds, and a large, strong figure with golden eyes, which only she knew to be her forest guardian. Ilara watched her, a tender smile on her lips. The girl still didn't speak much, but her eyes, once so full of sadness, now shone with childlike curiosity, and her laughter, once rare, echoed more frequently through the cottage. The community, oblivious to the storm brewing behind the scenes, continued to weave its net of love and protection around the small soul. In the mansion, the widow was on the verge of collapse. Samuel's absence, which she had tried to ignore, was now a deafening scream in her mind. She knew he hadn't left in search of a brooch. He had seen the girl, and now he was acting. Panic consumed her, and every shadow in the vastness of the house seemed like a messenger of doom. Her thoughts were a tangle of fury and terror. The freedom she so coveted was crumbling to dust, and the fortune, which should have been her salvation, was now the stage of her own ruin. She felt cornered, the image of the leopard with its golden eyes returning in her nightmares, no longer as a fantasy, but as the herald of relentless justice. She knew, with a cold, sharp certainty, that time was running out. Chief Arthur acted without delay. He gathered his men. Samuel, exhausted, insisted on accompanying them, driven by the duty of justice. The journey to the village was swift, propelled by the urgency of the child and the truth. The sun was high when they arrived, and the peaceful village contrasted painfully with the depravity that had brought them there. Ilara, surprised, received the guards with apprehension, but her eyes softened upon seeing Samuel, who explained the situation. The girl, playing, looked up. Arthur approached, kneeling, noticing the leopard drawing on the wood. "You're brave, aren't you?" he asked. The girl nodded, clinging to Ilara. Her eyes, once shadowed, now showed quietness and security. Ilara confirmed the story, describing the community's welcome and the child's resilience. Arthur listened, his heart both tightening and warming. The proof was there, alive, a testament to the miracle and love. Samuel felt both relief and sadness. With the story confirmed, Arthur, his men, and Samuel set off for the mansion. The atmosphere grew dense. Justice was on its way, calm and determined. In the mansion, the widow was in her room, nervous. Every sound was an omen. She tried to convince herself that Samuel wouldn't speak, but the truth gnawed at her mind. Suddenly, firm footsteps and knocks on the door broke the silence. The widow's heart pounded. She rushed to the window, peeking out. The sight of the guards, with Arthur and Samuel, made her blood run cold. Her face paled, her hands trembled. The door opened, footsteps echoed. She knew the dreaded moment had arrived. Arthur and Samuel entered the hall, the morning light revealing its cold opulence. The widow descended the stairs, rigid posture, a mask of indignation. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" she demanded, her voice laden with false authority, the tremor in her lips betraying her. Arthur, calm and firm, was unmoved. "Madam, we have come in the name of the law. We have serious information regarding your daughter." The mention of the girl made her mask falter. "My daughter? I don't know what you're talking about. My daughter is lost." Samuel stepped forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "She is not lost, madam. She is alive, and she is well. I found her in the village, taken in by Ilara and her people." Samuel's words, spoken with clarity, struck the widow like a blow. Her face contorted, fury and terror battling. "Liars! This is slander. She died in the forest. The beasts took her," she shrieked, her voice hysterical, revealing the truth. Arthur observed the scene, the final confirmation. The widow, cornered by her lies and by justice, collapsed, her hands covering her face, her convulsive sobs revealing a soul corroded by fear. The climax of her depravity was revealed in a cry of despair, the mask of cruelty finally crumbling to expose the miserable, broken woman she truly was. The widow's convulsive sobs echoed through the hall, a shrill sound that shattered the mask of indifference she had worn for so long. It was not a cry of repentance, but of despair and fury at being discovered, at her plan having failed so miserably. Arthur, with an expression of regret but unwavering in his conviction, gestured to his men. Two guards approached the woman, who was now sobbing uncontrollably, her hands still covering her face, her body trembling. "Madam," Arthur said, his voice firm, "you will come with us. The law must be upheld." The widow raised her head, her eyes swollen and red, filled with a chilling hatred mixed with dread. She tried to protest, her words catching in her throat, but Arthur's authority and the guard's presence were undeniable. She was gently but firmly led out of the mansion, her steps uncertain, the opulence that surrounded her now seeming like a cruel irony. Samuel watched the scene, a lump in his throat. There was no joy in his heart, only the bittersweet feeling of duty fulfilled. The loyalty he had once felt for the widow had been replaced by a deep sadness for her lost soul and immense relief for the child. He knew the road ahead would be long, but justice, finally, was in motion. As the widow was led away, the mansion seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if its walls could at last free themselves from the dark secrets they held. Samuel felt the weight of years of silence and complicity, even if involuntary, dissipate. He had chosen the right side, the side of innocence and truth, and this brought an unexpected peace to his heart. Back in the village, news of the widow's departure and the guard's action arrived like a murmur of hope. Ilara, knowing that justice was being served, felt a warmth spread through her chest. She looked at the girl, who was now playing with a rag doll, her eyes shining with a lightness that hadn't been there before. The child, still oblivious to the complexity of the adult world, felt only the warm embrace of the community. Arthur and Samuel returned to the village late in the afternoon, bringing confirmation that the widow was in custody and that investigations would proceed. The community gathered, and Arthur explained the situation with clarity and sensitivity. He assured everyone that the girl would be safe and that the law would ensure she had a future of love and protection. The girl, upon seeing Samuel, ran to him, hugging his legs, a gesture of trust that melted the foreman's heart. Elara, with tears in her eyes but a smile on her face, felt that the little forest flower, as they had nicknamed her, was finally free to blossom. The community, united in its altruism, had already decided that the girl would be cared for by everyone, a precious treasure the forest had entrusted to them. Human connection, unconditional love, and the overcoming of adversity manifested in every gentle glance, in every tight embrace. Justice, though late, had arrived, not only to punish cruelty, but to reaffirm the inherent goodness of the human spirit. The girl now had a family, not of blood but of heart, and a future where the shadow of the past could no longer reach her. Months turned into years, weaving a new tapestry of life for the girl in the village. Her name, which no one knew, was lovingly replaced by Aurora, a name Elara chose, signifying the dawn of a new day, the promise of light after darkness. And Aurora flourished. Her eyes, once haunted, now shone with the vivacity of a child, discovering the world with curiosity and joy. Laughter, once rare, became the sweetest sound echoing through the cottages, mingling with the women's songs and the calls of birds. Aurora grew up surrounded by unconditional love. Elara was her grandmother by heart, teaching her to gather herbs, to tell stories under the stars, and to recognize beauty in every small detail of nature. The other village children, her sole siblings, were her inseparable companions in innocent games, exploring the forest's surroundings, always under the watchful eye of adults, but without the fear that once consumed her. The trauma of abandonment and the dread of beasts were gradually replaced by memories of affection and security. She still remembered the leopard, her silent guardian, and sometimes, in her drawings, the imposing figure with golden eyes would appear, a symbol of protection and a reminder that kindness can emerge from the most unexpected places. Samuel, the foreman, became a paternal figure in her life. He visited the village regularly, bringing supplies and, more importantly, his calm and comforting presence. His eyes, once laden with guilt and concern, now reflected a serene peace upon seeing Aurora so happy. He told her stories of his youth, taught her about the stars and the importance of always defending truth and justice. Aurora, in turn, greeted him with tight hugs, feeling in him the security of a safe harbor. The connection between them was a testament to the human capacity to rise again and find new forms of family. As for the widow, the law of men, with its slowness and rigor, played its part. Investigations revealed the extent of her cruelty and the coldness of her plan. She was confronted with irrefutable evidence, with the testimony of Samuel and Elara, and with Aurora's very existence. The fortune she so coveted was used to cover the legal process and eventually to secure the girl's future. The widow, deprived of her freedom and wealth, was forced to face the consequences of her depravity. Her final fate was not one of death or violence, but of a reclusion that compelled her to confront herself, the bitterness that consumed her, and the monstrosity of her actions. Silence and isolation became her companions, a mirror of her empty soul. In the village, Aurora's life was living proof that love and compassion always find a way. She grew up strong, resilient, and full of empathy, a reflection of the altruism of the community that welcomed her. The story of her survival, of her mysterious guardian, and of the kindness of strangers became a whispered legend, a reminder of the light that can shine even in the greatest darkness. Aurora, the little forest flower, was not just a survivor but a beacon of hope, showing that human connection, justice, and overcoming are life's true riches, capable of transforming the cruelest of tragedies into a miracle of love and redemption. The years continued to pass, and Aurora, the girl the forest had entrusted to the village's care, blossomed into a young woman of serene beauty and unwavering spirit. Her hair, once tangled and dirty, now fell in brown cascades, framing a face where childlike innocence had given way to quiet wisdom. Her eyes, the same eyes that once reflected the dread of cruel abandonment, now radiated deep compassion and contagious joy. She was the personification of spring, living proof that life always finds a way, even after the harshest winter. Aurora never forgot her origins, nor the miracle that saved her. The fragmented memories of that fateful night in the forest, of the icy fear and the lurking shadow of the panther, were like invisible scars on her soul, but they did not define her. Instead, they propelled her to cherish every moment, every gesture of affection. The leopard, her silent guardian, remained in her thoughts, not as a beast, but as a symbol of protection and nature's mysterious kindness. She spent hours at the forest's edge, observing the animals, feeling an inexplicable connection to the wild world that had once almost consumed her, but which, paradoxically, had saved her. Ilara, now with completely silver hair, was her confidant and mentor. She taught her the secrets of healing herbs, the art of weaving baskets, and the importance of listening to her heart. Aurora absorbed every lesson, her agile fingers and curious mind always seeking knowledge. The stories of her childhood, told by the older women of the village, were now part of her own legend, a constant reminder of the altruism that surrounded her from day one. Samuel, the foreman, continued to be a constant and comforting presence. He visited her regularly, bringing not only news from the outside world, but also advice and the warmth of paternal affection. He taught her to read and write, to understand numbers, and the importance of standing firm in her principles. Aurora, in turn, shared her dreams and aspirations with him, and together they watched the stars, each point of light a promise of a bright future. The widow, whose name was rarely mentioned, remained in her reclusion, a somber reminder of the consequences of bitterness. Her story served as a cautionary tale, an echo of justice that, though slow, always reaches those who stray from the path of humanity. Aurora felt no hatred, only a distant sadness for the woman who abandoned her and immense gratitude for the life she had been given. The village, with its unwavering community spirit, prospered. Aurora, with her energy and desire to help, became a natural leader, organizing communal work, caring for the elders and teaching the children. She was the pulsating heart of the community, a beacon of hope that radiated love and resilience. Her story of abandonment and salvation, of cruelty and compassion, was a living testament to the strength of the human spirit and the ability to transform pain into purpose. With each sunrise, when the sun painted the sky golden, Aurora felt the promise of a new day, a day where human connection, justice, and overcoming would continue to weave the beautiful tapestry of her life. She was proof that even in the greatest darkness, the light of love and hope always finds a way to shine, illuminating not only her own destiny, but also that of everyone around her.